Would you be able to just tell us a bit about yourself and your journey into music and the piano? How did it all start for you? Because I read that the piano has been a really important part in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I actually started to learn the piano when I was 13.
Okay.
So it's relatively late, I guess, for somebody to become a classical pianist or concert pianist, however you want to define the sort of genre and performer, I guess. But it's actually not unusual, I don't think. I don't think it's necessarily if you start late or you start really early, it makes much of a difference. It's the sort of teacher you have at the beginning to kind of give you the impulse to go forward, as it were. And I had a great teacher when I first started. And actually, I grew up in Chesterfield, which, of course, is very famous for the Crooked Spire. And it's actually at the Crooked Spire that I had my lessons.
Oh,
so every Friday, I would go along at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
and have my lesson in the back room at the Crooked Spire, which has a beautiful grand piano, actually.
Yeah.
So that was a real treat to play, because my parents actually, usually, I think when you start an instrument, you start to learn an instrument, you don't really get given like a real instrument, as it were. You always get like a student instrument or a keyboard, especially for piano.
Yeah.
I at home had a 61 key keyboard, very let's say dodgy keyboard. Didn't sound like a piano, but it did its job. And it wasn't until 2 years later when I was allowed a real piano, so I could play real tunes and all this kind of stuff. So back at the Crooked Spire, when I had my lessons, it was such a treat to go along every Friday at 7 p.m. and have my lesson on a beautiful grand piano in this sort of historic church in the middle of a famous sort of town, really. So then 5 years later, I went to train at college and to do my professional training. So by the time I had started at 13, at 16, I'd achieved grade 8 piano. And then at 17, I achieved grade 8 theory.
Mm-hmm.
So then by the time I went to college, I was kind of just about ready, I think, to start, as they say, professional training.
Mm. So where did you train, and what was your experience of professional training like?
Okay, so I trained at a place called Colchester Institute, which is in Essex, in Colchester.
Yeah.
It was a great place because
Sounds like an amazing place.
It really, I mean, it really was. A lot of people assume that classical musicians go to maybe a conservatoire or a music college.
Yeah, that's the standard route, isn't it?
So, yeah, it's pretty much standard route, I guess. But I went to a lot of auditions, as many people do, and I met my teacher, who ended up being my teacher at the Colchester Institute. And my parents kind of said, maybe you should study with her, because we sort of had a connection in the audition, and she could kind of, we did almost like a mini lesson, I guess, at the audition. We just had, all I can describe it as a connection. So I kind of knew, as well as with my parents' advice, that I should really go and train with her. So even though I did get into as it were, a conservatoire, I actually made the decision to go to, which somebody would say is a local college. It just has a music department, but the teachers were great, really good teachers.
Yeah.
And so I trained there for 3 years. And during that time, I also had masterclass sessions with a variety of different pianists, all known for different repertoire. And then after my 3 years training, I got a scholarship to train with Nellie Ben-Orr in the Alexander technique, which was a great experience because, of course, until it's pointed out, you're not necessarily aware of what you're doing as in movement. So a lot of my Alexander technique was actually used to stop me from moving, essentially, because I would move a lot, swaying side to side and doing lots of big hand gestures and things, which in a performance is great, but in practice, when you're at home practicing, it's actually losing a lot of energy. You don't need to use that energy. You need to put that into your technique and learning the music. So that was great, actually, a great experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you said, because I think that you can go to the best conservatoire in the world, you can go to the best college, but if you don't go there and, you know, utilize the resources there or make the most of your experience, then what's the point, I suppose? And it sounds like that you really, really thrived in that environment at Colchester. And as I just said, I mean, I've heard, you know, some amazing things about that place.
Definitely. I mean, the college now, I have to say, doesn't actually have a music department. It
Yeah,
has a education degree, music
yeah,
education degree,
yeah,
and it has, I believe, a film and game composition course now.
yeah,
But as a classical music degree, it
yeah.
doesn't really exist anymore at the college, which is such a shame.
Yeah, no, because I remember they used to have they used to have teach like singing and, you know, like you said, classical music, didn't they? And
Yeah, across the board, we had a wind orchestra, we had a full symphony orchestra,
yeah, yeah.
so many opportunities. And then over the years, it kind of, as I kept in touch with certain teachers, I found out that it was gently dwindling down to where the point, I think it was 4 years ago maybe, they decided not to have a classical, typical traditional classical music course.
Hmm. You talked there about your journey into piano, and I think that ties in with the album. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your debut album? I really enjoyed listening to the samples that you sent me. You said that it was based on your biographical experiences. So if you would be able to, can you tell us a little bit more about that, and why did you feel that this was the right time to put out an album?
Sure. I pretty much decided to produce this album because at home I have a music manuscript and it's literally got tiny little motifs and chord sequences and so many ideas that I've written over the years. I just had a moment where I thought to myself, I need to put these, I need to produce something that encapsulates everything that I'd written down over the years. And because quite often, as a classical pianist, you get asked if you compose your own music. And I've always
Okay.
constantly said, no, I don't compose music. I don't do that. Not anything that I would put in front of people. And it's kind of one of those things. It's about, I suppose, having the confidence to put your own music out there after all so many years of playing, the standard repertoire, the Chopin, the Beethoven, the Liszt, Debussy.
Yeah.
And it was kind of one of those moments where I go, okay, I have some time. I need to, as I say, encapsulate what I've written down over the many years in this notebook, which makes no sense whatsoever to anybody else, but it makes sense to me. So as I said, I decided to produce it, but how was I going to do that? And that was my big sort of moment. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do it on my own.
Yeah.
So I self-produced. I have composed, mixed, mastered, designed, performed, of course. As you say very kindly, you've listened to some of the tracks,
Yeah.
and I've tried to produce a string orchestra accompaniment, and it was actually produced very helpfully with a violinist who's a great friend of mine and a stunning player, Liz Lipscomb. And she came on board. She did some remote violin work for me. I sent over the scores. She recorded on top of my piano tracks I sent, and I mixed it in. And hopefully we've created a string orchestra sound that I could possibly do at home. So it took me probably a good few weeks to figure it all out, to see how I was actually going to facilitate the album. I think I managed it.